Today we're driving a 2022 Volkswagen GLI. This is the 6-speed manual car. These only come in one spec, the Autobahn, and you can either get a manual or a 7-speed dual clutch transmission. This has 228 horsepower, 258 pound-feet of torque from a 2-liter turbocharged 4-cylinder, the legendary EA888. Fantastic engine from Volkswagen. This is front-wheel drive. We have a limited slip front differential and brake torque vectoring. This also has adaptive suspension, leather seats, and a host of other features that we will talk about in this video. Let's start on the outside. We'll walk you around this GLI, show you what it looks like inside and out, and take you for a drive. 2022 GLI gets a little bit of a refresh. This is just kind of that mid-cycle refresh for the GLI, not the whole new Mark 8 platform like we've seen with the GTI. This still has, I don't know if you noticed, physical buttons on the inside. We get kind of a refreshed front and rear bumper. This has the new Volkswagen logo now too, which looks pretty sharp. Surprisingly practical, compact sedan with this GLI. The trunk space in this thing is shocking. Look at that, that's huge. Rear seats fold down 60/40. You get a compact spare tire. Very lightweight trunk, easy to open and close. Plenty of room in the back seats too. Lots of leg room. Pretty nice, practical package with this GLI. We get an armrest here in the middle. It's pretty bare bones back here. No USB ports, no vents for climate control, just window switches, door handles, and seats. Oh, and you do get a couple of lights. I guess that's nice. I like the fact that they haven't gone to all the silly touch controls that the GTI now has. It does inherit the GTI steering wheel with these haptic buttons, but honestly, it's a pretty good wheel. I don't mind those buttons as much as I used to. I've gotten used to them over time. We get physical controls for our climate control, our heated and ventilated seats. We get a mode button, a traction control off button. I'm not completely sold on the looks of this car. It still has slightly awkward proportions. Definitely not as good looking of a GLI as the Mark 6, for example. I think the front end is a little bit too bulbous and tall. The grille's a little bit weirdly shaped, but it's not an offensive car. And for what it is, it still looks a little bit more special than the standard Jetta. Pop the hood and talk about this engine. Volkswagen, I think, still makes one of the best 2-liter turbos. This EA888 is really impressive, super efficient, 37 miles to the gallon on the highway and 26 mpg in the city is what it's rated for on the EPA. You can honestly probably beat that on the highway. This thing is getting crazy mpg numbers on the readout. Tons of torque from this engine, really nice 2-liter turbo. The only complaint is gearing is super long in this GLI. Second gear, I think, tops out at something like 72 or 74 miles per hour. We'll test that once we get out on the road. Very heavy hood, no hood struts, that's fine. Even the Golf R doesn't get hood struts these days. Okay, that's a little walk around of the GLI. Let's hop inside and talk about this interior some. Okay. So we get a fully digital gauge cluster, which is configurable in a number of different views. You can switch it up to a more minimalist view that just shows you information. You can change it up to this view, which shows you even more information, but in a different arrangement. And then you just have your standard gauges, which I appreciate because this is a manual car and you want to be able to see your tachometer. Steering wheel buttons, again, pretty well organized, pretty simple. You can cycle between different menus here. We'll just leave it on driving data. You can customize these gauges so that you see information in the center of this gauge or this gauge. Down here we get 2 USB-C ports and wireless charging for our phones. That's actually seemed to work pretty well this week. You have to kind of put your phone in the right orientation, but once you figure it out, it's pretty straightforward. A bunch of different drive modes: Eco, Comfort, Normal, Sport, and Custom. I have my custom drive mode set to Let's see, dynamic chassis control is normal. That's basically just our ride quality suspension tuning. Steering is normal. Front diff lock is sport. drivetrain is sport, engine sound is normal. In sport, engine sound gets pretty loud. I don't know if the Volkswagen is still calling the engine enhancer, sound enhancer, the sound doctor these days, but it sounds similar. It kind of has a 5-cylinder warble to it. It's pretty aggressive sounding. I think it sounds pretty good. I do like these seats. They have kind of this red accent in the ventilation holes. Overall, the interior does feel kind of cheap. There's just a lot of plastic bits all over the place. Dashboard material is not particularly exciting. Down here, it's pretty cheap and plasticky, but your touch points are good. The steering wheel is fantastic. It feels really good in hand, and the shifter is a joy. It's a real pleasure to row through the gears in this car. Basically, I'm going to say this GLI is just a really good daily driver. It puts down some good performance numbers. It has some great performance parts like adaptive suspension and a limited slip differential, but ultimately as a performance car, it's a bit disappointing to drive. Again, we'll talk about that here in a minute, but as a daily, I think this GLI is fantastic. On that note, let's take it out and drive this on the road. Let's see how it does. I think the last GLI we had was a few years ago. Not much really has changed with the driving experience. We just now get this one spec Autobahn, which comes in just under $32,000, $31,900, including destination. As a manual transmission goes, this is a super easy car to drive. Clutch is light, there isn't a ton of feel, but it's very easy to drive smoothly. All of your controls are super light, steering very light, clutch pedal very light, shifter's pretty light too. Everything feels cohesive and well matched. All of your inputs are consistent, and I like that with the car. I'd actually be a little bit hard pressed to choose between the 6-speed manual and the dual clutch transmission. I think I would actually swing for the manual in this GLI, even though the gearing is so ridiculously tall. It does help with fuel economy, and it is a really fun manual transmission to drive around. You rev this out, you get into the higher RPMs, and there is a ton of rev hang, but around town, revs drop pretty smoothly, pretty naturally. The engine is responsive too, even in normal mode. Easy to blip the throttle for rev matching or heel toe downshifts. You can see here on the tachometer display on the left, there's a little bit of a gear shift indicator prompting you to shift into the tallest gear possible for maximum fuel economy. Haven't found a place to turn that off yet. Ride quality is pretty nice in normal mode. Comfort softens things up quite a bit, and it does get quite stiff in sport mode for more aggressive driving. First gear tops out about 42 miles per hour. I have really nice visibility and sight lines all around this GLI. Pretty thin A-pillars, great visibility out of the side and the back. No complaints there. Let's put us into sport here just for fun. Gauges turn red. And our engine sound gets significantly louder. Throttle response also increases quite a bit. Top a second, 75 miles per hour. But at least on the highway at 70, you're cruising at about 2,300 RPM, which is pretty ideal for fuel economy. Even in sport mode, ride quality is pretty comfortable on the highway. It is fun to drive this car in sport mode. You get just a little bit extra sharpness from the vehicle, from the chassis. It gets a little bit stiffer. Engine sounds pretty good too. So we've got a traction control off button right here. It doesn't completely disable everything, unfortunately. It just puts you into an ESC sport mode. You can can still get a little bit of intervention, especially in low traction scenarios. The rev hang does help a little bit though with shift smoothness, especially at higher RPMs. I gotta say, guys, I really do like this manual transmission. I think this is probably the way to go for the GLI. Very quiet at highway speeds too. Definitely a lot more comfortable as far as wind noise and NVH goes compared to the Civic Si. And the ride quality is quite a bit better than the Civic Si's. Civic Si borders on a little bit on the stiff side. This GLI strikes a perfect balance, and the ability to customize all of those settings between drive mode and engine response and suspension stiffness in that custom mode is really, really helpful in this car. Let's turn traction control back on. So, not bad to drive in a performance setting, especially in sport mode. It definitely sharpens things up. It's not as sharp, not as fun as the GTI, but it's not far off. And as a daily, just cruising around in this thing normally, I've actually really enjoyed driving this car this week. Tires do not have a ton of grip. They're just kind of your standard run-of-the-mill performance all-season tire. We don't get any automatic rev matching, but it is pretty easy to rev match yourself. I think where this GLI shines is just on the daily commute, the daily grind. It's a really comfortable, luxurious, fun to drive, sporty car in just kind of every scenario. I'd be happy sitting in traffic in this. I'd be happy driving around the city with this. Cruising on the highway, it's a pleasure. It gets really excellent fuel economy. And then when you want to take it out on a back road, enjoy the chassis a little bit, have a little bit of fun on an entrance or exit ramp, you can do that, but it's not necessarily a car that really pushes you to drive it fast. It's a little bit more of a subdued and relaxed driving experience. It's a very easy car to drive. It's a very easy car to drive smoothly. We still do get some typical Volkswagen dashboard creaks and rattles. That's nothing new here. Otherwise, this car feels pretty solid. There's definitely a bit of an undertone of cost savings here, like I've kind of felt in a lot of newer Volkswagen products. You do get this menu that swipes down from above, where you can adjust your instrument cluster panel and lighting, and there's a couple quick access controls there to mute the audio. There is not a mute button in this GLI. You either have to turn the volume all the way down or get to the swipe down menu. The problem is, most of the time, that swipe down menu doesn't even work because there's a little ridge right here that kind of gets in the way and impedes your ability to accurately swipe down on that menu. So you really have to be deliberate with your finger action, and if you have bigger fingers, it makes it a little bit difficult. while we're just cruising here, let's do a quick sound system test with this Beats audio. This Beats audio system has gotten a little bit of flack. I don't think it's on the same level as the Bose system and the Civic Si, for example, but it's not a bad sound system for a $32,000 car. It's got nice clear trebles, a deep bass. It's a 400-watt sound system. I would be perfectly happy with this in my Volkswagen GLI. I think the GLI ultimately still does what it's always done and what it's always set out to do as just a fun-to-drive compact sedan. In many ways, it doesn't quite measure up to the GTI as far as performance, quality, driving feel, but there are some real positives to this GLI now that the GTI has gone full touchscreen, and this has physical buttons. I think that's a really compelling reason to swing for this GLI over the GTI. Makes it a much easier car to live with on a daily basis. All right, so how can we sum things up with this GLI? Pretty good to drive as a performance car. A little bit soft, a little bit light to the touch, but still, it satisfies, it's fun to drive. It's not going to be as fun as a Civic Si. It's not going to be as enjoyable as an Elantra N. This is the more luxurious, comfortable, subdued daily driver. It does a really nice job, though, as a daily performance option that has a manual transmission. It's just a really nice, enjoyable, easy to live with car that hits a lot of marks in terms of practicality, features, price point. It doesn't look too bad. It kind of is the whole package like the GLI always has been. I think where it really shines, though, as this may be the best daily driver option out of the Civic Si, out of the Elantra N, out of the the options that are in this segment. It's very fuel efficient. It's very comfortable in here. You don't really make any concessions with its performance in terms of ride quality, though. When you start to really push this car and treat it like a performance vehicle, that's when it starts to disappoint. You can't completely disable traction control. You do a launch in this thing, or if you're in the snow or you're in the wet, you're always cutting power. You can see the traction control light flashing, even though everything is supposedly turned off. The chassis is all right, but ultimately the tires kind of limit it in what it's capable of. The GLI really hasn't changed that much. They've just added some more modern features. They've changed the badge, updated the steering wheel, improved the infotainment slightly. It's just a very nice, straightforward car that I think an enthusiast would enjoy who just wants a little bit more of a grown-up driving experience compared to some of the other options out there. So anyway, we'll leave it at that. Let me know if you guys have any questions in the comments. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next video. Take care.